actually say everybody. You guys that are here. All right, let's go ahead and get started. So, I see most people are online watching. They're practicing the social distance. But we do have a few people here with us tonight. So, some house cleaning real quick. Nobody called me and told me that the foundation here had closed the place down. I just got a call from Scott saying that the Western Club was closed, and I thought that meant the meetings decided not to have meetings. So I didn't know. So when I got here tonight, I called Dorsey, and it's the foundation that don't want it. So next week we won't use the place. So next week we'll meet at, what's the, you know the address?
3084 North Portland.
3084 North Portland. Next week we'll meet at the CA Clubhouse, 3084 North Portland. Next door, it used to be the
Round table.
The round table used to be next door. If you know where that is, in that little shopping center there. 3084 North Portland. We'll be there next week. And because this place will be closed until the 30th and maybe after that. So until this place is back open again, we'll meet there. Hey Charlotte, hi guys. All right. So let's go ahead. So what we've been talking about in step 2, we've been talking about believing. We spent a lot of time talking about the difference between believing. Believing is hope rather than faith. Okay, and then last week we talked a little bit about, you know, the last couple of weeks, what you're worth, because, you know, a lot of us come here truly feeling worthless. So we do have value, and we are important, and we are meaningful. And so, you know, when you crawl into these rooms, you really don't feel that way. And so, what we haven't really talked about yet is what is your higher power, or who is your higher power, or what is your higher power. We've talked about the two qualifications for a higher power. We talked about, and it's in the big book. The first one is in the step itself. It's a power greater than ourselves. And the other one, I think, is somewhere around page 93, if I remember right, and it says that it must make sense to you. Those are the two qualifications of having a higher power. And so we talked about the importance of, you know, the book, we read it a week or two ago, you know, so we're going to talk about God. Because in the next step, it's asking us to turn our will and our life over to God, right? And how can we do that if we have no understanding, or we don't know what we believe about God, or we don't believe anything about God, or we believe God is punishing, or we believe God is vengeful, and, you know, if I'm not comfortable with a higher power. So we've read in here where the search for God begins, and we've read in here where spirituality begins. And so the rest of this, let's go ahead where we left off. I think we left off on page 50. Okay. So look what it says on the second paragraph. Did we do the first paragraph yet? No?
I wrote down.
Okay, so on the top of page 50, first paragraph, it says, instead we looked at the human defects of these people and sometimes used their shortcomings as a basis for wholesale. Yeah, I think we did do this paragraph. Because we missed the beauty of the forest because of some of the ugliness of the trees. And we never gave the spiritual side of life a fair hearing. So now it's saying, in our personal stories, you will find a wide variation in the way each teller approaches and conceives of the power which is greater than himself. So we've talked about this before. Every story in the back of the book is about step 2. Okay? And this is explaining that to you. Whether we agree with the particular approach or concept or conception seems to make little difference. Experience has taught us that these are matters about which, for our purpose, we need not be worried. There are questions for each individual to settle for himself. So another instruction here, okay? It's actually a couple of instructions in this paragraph. Gaining access to and believing in requires that you do something more than saying, I believe, okay? And then on the last sentence here, there are questions for each individual to settle for himself. So it's instructing you to ask yourself this question and settle this for yourself. So I've been pointing out to you, as we've gone through this chapter, I've been pointing out to you all the instructions that are in here. And there's many of them, and there's a lot more still. And that's what this whole chapter is about. When people talk about it's just about coming to believe. But how? It's instructed me to do things, okay? And I need to try those things. So now it says, on one proposition, however, these men and women are strikingly agreed. Every one of them has gained access to and believes in a power greater than himself. So gain access to and believes in a power greater than himself. This power has in each case accomplished the miraculous, the humanly impossible. As the celebrated American statesman put it, let's look at the record. Here are thousands of men, worldly indeed. They flatly declare that since they have come to believe in a power greater than themselves, to take a certain attitude toward that power and do certain simple things, there has been a revolutionary change in their way of living and thinking. In the face of collapse and despair, in the face of total failure of their human resources, they found that a new power, peace, happiness, and sense of direction flowed into them. This happened soon after they wholeheartedly met a few simple requirements. What are those simple requirements?
The steps.
Okay, the steps, but
They gained access to and believe in a higher power.
yes, because the steps may be a part of it, but it's not. It says this happened soon after they wholeheartedly met a few simple requirements. So they actually didn't go through the steps yet for this to happen to them. But what they did was, what'd you just say, Donna?
Gained access to and believe in a power greater than themselves.
Right, they gained access to and believed in a power greater than themselves. And those are the simple requirements. And how do I do that? I have to question where I'm at with this thing. What is it that I believe about this God that I believe in? Once confused and baffled by the seeming futility of existence, they show the underlying reasons why they were making heavy going of life. Leaving aside the drink question, they tell why living was so unsatisfactory. They show how the change came over them. When many hundreds of people are able to say that the consciousness of the presence of God is today the most important factor of their lives, they present the powerful reason why one should have faith. Now, it doesn't say you're going to have faith. It says a powerful reason why you should have faith. The faith is going to come to you. One year I was in Atlanta, Georgia, and I was speaking at a convention. There was a lot of people, probably about 1,500 people in the audience. And I always have my big book and for some reason I never really go into the book, but I always have it anyway. And for some reason I asked how many new people were there, and a whole bunch of people raised their hand. And I said, I want you to watch this. And I asked, how many people in here have a relationship with a God? And hundreds and hundreds of people raised their hand. And I said, keep your hand up if today the most important fact of your life is the consciousness of the presence of that God. And probably 1,000 people had their hand up. And I says to the new people, that's reason why you should at least believe. There's something working here. Something is happening for these people. And it was a very mixed audience. There was, former pimps and gangsters and lawyers and, and yes, I classify them all together. So it's an interesting thing. So go down to the last paragraph. It says, we asked ourselves this, and this is another instruction, right? Are not some of us just as biased and unreasonable about the realm of the spirit as were the ancients about the realm of material? Even in the present century, American newspapers were afraid to print an account of the Wright brothers' first successful flight of Kitty Hawk. Had not all efforts at flight failed before? Did not Professor Langley's flying machine go to the bottom of the Potomac River? Was it not true that the best mathematical minds had proved man could never fly? Had not people said God had reserved that privilege to the birds? Only 30 years later, the conquest of the air was almost an old story, and airplane travel was in full swing. So I need to question my bias and unreasonableness about the realm of the spirit. And we all have that to greater and lesser degrees. Now on page 52, the second paragraph says, we had to ask ourselves why we shouldn't apply to our human problems the same readiness to change our point of view. Okay? We were having trouble with personal relationships. We couldn't control emotional natures. We were prey to misery and depression. Couldn't make a living. We had a feeling of uselessness. We were full of fear. We were unhappy. We couldn't seem to be of help, real help to other people. So, and these are what they call the bedevilments. Okay? And there's a group of people that go around today in AA, and they really point out the threefold disease. That's their belief, that we have a disease of mind, body, and spirit. And I was speaking at a convention years ago with one of these guys that is very prominent. If I said his name, you'd know him. Not from here, but very prominent, and he's really a strong proponent for the threefold disease. And I asked him, I said, you know, what is the third part of the disease? Because, you know, we believe it to be a twofold disease. And he said, well, and he took me to page 52, and he read these bedevilments to me, and I said, yeah. But I said, you missed the first sentence. The first sentence says, we had to ask ourselves why we shouldn't apply to our human problems. These are human problems. Every human being on the face of the earth has these problems. This is not a disease. This is not part of a disease that only we have. It's not a disease at all. It's a human problem, these bedevilments. So, you know, I found it interesting that was where he got this from. So, again, it says, when we saw others solve their problems by a simple reliance upon the spirit of the universe, we had to stop doubting the power of God. Our ideas did not work, but the God idea did. So, again, this reliance is more than a belief. It's something that requires us to have more than a belief. Sanity, when we talk about the insanity that we live, what is the insanity that we live? Well, it's insane for an alcoholic to think that he could take a drink. Okay? And it's just as insane for a person that suffers from a gambling addiction to make a small bet on one game. Or somebody suffering from food addiction to think it's okay just to eat one donut. You know, these are an insane thinking. And insanity is stuff that I do that sabotages my life. Okay? And that's what the insane thing is here. Insanity, the soundness of mind, is what we defined in here a week or so ago, is that sanity is the ability to see the truth about myself. And that's a great definition for us. And sanity is the ability to see the truth about myself. And if I'm an alcoholic, then the truth about me is I cannot take a drink. Now, somewhere in recovery, as we work these steps and experience a spiritual awakening, it gets away from that thought, and it gets to a thought like where I'm at today. And I've been this way for many, many years now. Well, I have no desire to alter my mind. I have no desire to alter my mind. Now, when I got here the first few years, I needed to alter my mind, and I tried to in every which way except for alcohol and drugs. But I used sex, and I used everything you could think of. to alter my mind, to make me feel different, you know, and they're all insane. And what I found out is that it's got a lot to do with control. I had to be in control to be comfortable. Spirituality doesn't deal with just God. It deals with you, and it is incomplete unless it includes other people. So, my relationships, I couldn't have a good one because I had to either dominate or depend on you. And that's all forms of, both ways are forms of control. How do I control you? I control you through dominance or dependence, either way. All right. So go ahead to page 53 now. Let's go to the second paragraph. It says, when we became alcoholics, crushed by a self-imposed crisis, we could not postpone or evade. We had to fearlessly face the proposition that either God is everything or else he is nothing. God either is or he isn't. What was our choice to be? Now, first of all, this is not just an instruction. This is a huge instruction. It's probably one of the biggest instructions you'll see in the book. It's asking me, is God everything or is he nothing? And it's asking me to make a decision about that. So now, here's the kicker to this though. If you had a room full of 100 recovering people, and I don't care how long they've been sober, 3 days or 30 years, and you asked everybody in the room, is God everything or is he nothing? Probably you'll get 100% response, God is everything. And I ask people that I work with that all the time, that I sponsor, and they come to me and I say, is God everything or is he nothing? They say he's everything. Well, why don't you act that way? If God is everything, why don't you act that way? Well, then God really isn't everything. You see, we know that the correct answer is God is everything, but we don't act that way. We don't live that way. And so this instruction is, so then the next thing that I have to ask you is, if you say God is everything, and then I would say, based on what? And that's a good question. God is everything. What are you basing that statement on? Based on what? God is everything? What is describe God to me? What is it you think and believe about God? I don't know. Really? If you're really not sure, how do you know that he's everything? Because we know that that's the right answer, but we don't have any kind of hope or any kind of belief in us that allows us to act as if. It's one of the things I wrote on the board this week, right? If you don't believe, make believe. Some people have a problem with that. Oh, we got to get real and recovery. Well, you've been making believe in your whole life. You've been bullshitting and faking shit your whole life. Don't tell me you got a problem with it now. God either is or he isn't. What's your choice to be? And based on what? It's so important to have a God that an understanding of a God. I don't understand God, but I have an understanding of God that works well for me. I still don't understand God, but my understanding of God works well for me. That may sound tricky, but that's the truth of it. We don't have to recreate the wheel. You don't have to come into recovery and recreate God. You don't have to do that. You can begin, the book says, from wherever you're at. We press change and rearrange, and God's fine with that. But my question to you then is, based on what? If God is everything, what are you basing that statement on? And that's a real important question to ask yourself. And it's kind of, what was our choice to be? It's kind of, my friend Clancy always said, I don't know if you ever heard him talk about the invisible boat, but he tells a story about the guy. Did we do that? Talk about that here? He talks about a guy, I don't do it nearly as good as Clancy does, but a guy walking along the beach, and it's kind of It's kind of dark out a little bit, getting dark out, and nobody's on the beach, but he hears out in the water somewhere, there's a little island, I guess, and he hears a lot of fun, a lot of music, and a lot of people laughing and going on there, and he'd like to get out there. He don't know how far it is, he don't know how to get there, and there's a guy, he sees a guy standing near the water, and he says, how do you get out to the island there? And the guy says, oh, you could get in the boat, and there's no boat there. The guy says, come on, get in the boat, I'll take you there. So there's no boat. He says, he goes, then he makes believe he's sitting down, and the guy starts going like this. And what happens is, as they get close to the island, the boat starts to appear. The boat starts to come to life. But he had to get in the boat because he couldn't get there anyway. He had to get in the boat that there was none, that wasn't there. He had to get into the boat that was invisible. He had to get into a boat that he couldn't see. But as they rolled and rowed, the boat started to appear. And that's what happens here in recovery. You got to get into this boat of recovery, and you got to do some things, the rowing, and as you're rowing, the island will appear to you. God will come to you. It'll make sense to you. Some point, someday. So he says, arrived at this point, we were squarely confronted with the question of faith. We couldn't duck the issue. Some of us already walked far over the bridge of reason, if you notice that's capitalized, right, toward the desired shore of faith. So why is that capitalized, the bridge of reason? It's because so far, your life, your thinking was the Alpha and the Omega. Your thinking was God. You playing God. Your reason was all, everything. The outlines of the promise of a new land had brought luster to tired eyes and courage, fresh courage to flagging spirits. Friendly hands had stretched out in welcome. We were grateful that reason, our thinking, had brought us so far, but somehow we couldn't quite step ashore. Perhaps we had been leaning too heavily on reason that last mile, and we did not like to lose our support. That was natural. But let us think a little more closely. Without knowing it, had we not been brought to where we stood by a certain kind of faith? Did we not believe in our own reasoning? Did we not have confidence in our own in our ability to think? What was that but a sort of faith? Yes, we had been faithful, objectively faithful to the God of reason. So in one way or another, we discovered that faith had been involved all the time. We found, too, that we had been worshipers. What a state of mental gooseflesh that used to bring on. Had we not variously worshipped people, sentiment, things, money, and ourselves? And then with a better motive, had we not worshipfully beheld the sunset, the sea, or a flower? Now, just for a minute, look over on the next page, on page 55, right? And it kind of says the same thing. Actually, we were fooling ourselves, for deep down every man, woman, and child has a fundamental idea of God. It may be obscured by calamity, by pomp, by worship of other things. By calamity, by pomp, or by worship of other things. And what is he saying here? Had we not variously worshipped people, sentiment, things, money, and ourselves? Now here's my question to you. I want you to think about this for a minute. What is the better motive? It says here, and then, with a better motive, had we not worshipfully beheld the sunset, the sea, or a flower. So what is the better motive? Think about that a second. Melissa, what might be the better motive?
Is it ego?
Ego? Ego would definitely not be a better motive.
I'm not understanding the question. I mean,
So it says that we had worshipped, had we not variously worshipped people, sentiment, things, money, and ourselves, right? And over here in the next page saying the same thing. may be obscured by calamity, by pomp, by worship of other things. So we worship people, sentiment, things, money, and ourselves. And then he says, and then with a better motive, had we not worshipfully beheld the sunset, the sea, or a flower. So what might be a better motive? What might be a better motive?
God's creations.
God's creation. Okay. Anybody else want to take a shot at it?
Something that we didn't have to do with.
Huh?
Something that we didn't have anything to do with.
Well, that may be true, but why is that a better motive?
Because it leaves us out of the equation.
But if we're worshiping it, it doesn't leave us out of the equation. But I see where you're coming from. You're not completely wrong there.
I just kind of took it to mean, it says, with a better motive have we not worshipfully beheld the sunset, the sea, or the flowers, searching for God in those things. Seeing those things and searching for something other than our own reason.
Okay. You see what that is saying? Searching for God in those things. I want to take that, what you just said, and turn that around and tell you, and this is just my opinion. The book is not verifying this. But I want to take what you just said and turn that around. It's not us searching for God in those things. It's God himself in us appreciating those things. Because deep down in every man, woman, and child is the fundamental idea of God. It's going to tell us on the next page that God is a part of us just as sure as you're sitting here. God is here. So many words it says that. So, have you ever, John, you put together old cars, don't you?
Yeah.
And when you're done, do you look back and go, wow, that's cool?
Yeah.
And you appreciate the creation that you just did, didn't you? Right? And all of us have something that we do that we're good at. And when we've completed whatever it is you're good at, and we look at it, we go, cool. I did that. That's pretty cool. You know, we may not outwardly say that, but we take pride in those things, right? And if God is a part of us, and God created all these things, because let me tell you this, I'm not the type of guy that worships a sunset, a flower, or a tree, or whatever it is. I'm not that kind of guy. That's just not me. But I have found, looking at a sunset and being awestruck, I have found looking at a garden and been awestruck.
So is it the same, would it be, so my book was given to me and there's notes in it from her and it says concept of a greater power. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Concepts of a greater power?
It says concept greater power. So you're talking about like looking at the sun and.
Well, I'm just saying what makes sense to me. What makes a guy like me look at a flower and go, wow, that's beautiful? Again, that's not the type of person I am. I can give a shit about a flower.
It's the God in you.
That's right. It's the God in me appreciating his own creation. Like Deb said, that it's us searching for God in those things, and I say it's just the opposite of that. It's the God in us appreciating the creations that he made. See, here's a weird thought, right? But God, in all his greatness, created man, and when I say man, I mean woman too, created us in his image, right? And when I read that thing a couple weeks ago, right, the greatest miracle, God said in there that you need me and I need you, right? So why would God need us? Because everything that God has created in earth, he really can't appreciate any of it unless he does it through us.
He lives vicariously through us.
That's right. So God appreciates his creations through us. Does that make any kind of sense to you? So when a guy like me looks at a garden and a flower or a sunset and goes, wow, holy shit, that's cool. That's just not me. I know that my channel is clear, and that the God in me is not blocked by worship of pomp and circumstance and people and money and sentiment and things. And it's clear of all of this stuff, and because the boat is starting to appear. You understand? I've been rowing and I've been rowing, and I didn't even know what I was rowing because it wasn't even a boat when I got in it. But as I rowed, a boat started to appear. And as I do this journey, I start removing these things that block me from the sunlight of the Spirit, and I have a clear channel, and the God that's in me can look at a flower that He's made and go, cool. And it comes out through me. And that is a better motive. And that's the only motive that makes sense to me. Because I will worship money and pomp and circumstance and things if left to my own devices. I won't worship the sunset or the sea or a flower. But when my channel is clear and I'm not blocked, and the God in me is kind of like, remember the movie E.T.? Everybody remember that movie? E.T.? And E.T. had the little light inside him, and the light started shining. And when he was getting happy, the light would shine, right? And that's like with us, that God is in us, and He starts shining. And it's kind of like the E.T. thing, that the God in me starts shining, and I can't help but smile, and I can't help but be kinder than the kind of person I really am. And I can't help but go out of my way and help somebody that's not me, because I'm so selfish and self-centered. And the God in me starts shining, and because the channel is clear. And when the channel is clear, I recognize the God all around me. Does all that kind of make sense? It's a cool way to look at it, right? Mm-hmm. All right. So it says to us, who of us had not loved something or somebody? How much did these feelings, these loves, these worships have to do with pure reason? Very little, right? Little or nothing we saw at last. Were not these things the tissue out of which our lives were constructed? Did not these feelings, after all, determine the course of our existence? It was impossible to say that we had no capacity for faith or love or worship. In one form or another, we had been living by faith and little else. So faith can be had, but it needs to be developed. It needs to be developed. It starts with a hope. It starts with believing. Again, you can't have faith in something you don't believe in. So it starts with believing. And if you fake it till you make it, if you don't believe, make believe. If you get in the boat that's invisible, that you don't see, that you think we're crazy, that when are you going to row? If you get in there and you start rowing, the boat will appear. And you can get to the island. Okay. And the bottom of the page it says, hence we saw that reason isn't everything. Neither is reason, as most of us use it, entirely dependable, though it may emanate from our best minds. What about people who have proved that man could never fly? Yet we have been seeing another kind of flight, a spiritual liberation from this world, people who rose above their problems. They said God made these things possible, and we only smiled. We had seen spiritual release, but we liked to tell ourselves it wasn't true. Actually, we were fooling ourselves, for deep down in every man, woman, and child is the fundamental idea of God. It may be obscured by calamity, by pomp, by worship of other things, but in one form or other it is there. And that's what we just talked about, right? For faith in a power greater than ourselves and miraculous demonstrations of that power in human lives are facts as old as man himself. So what is he saying here? He's saying miraculous demonstrations of that power in human lives. He doesn't say that they stopped 2,000 years ago. What he's actually saying is that God is performing miracles on a regular basis in people's lives. Let's look around the room when you're in a meeting. I don't know about you guys. I know I'm not supposed to be alive. I know I'm not supposed to be a free man if I am alive. I should be locked in a cell for the rest of my life. I should be dead, but I'm not dead, and I should be locked in a cell for the rest of my life. Yet I'm free. I couldn't go 5 minutes without taking a drink or a drug, and here I am over 28 years. If that's not a miracle, I don't know what is. I used to step on people like they were insects. Today I care about people. If that's not a miracle, I don't know what is. Miraculous demonstration in human lives as old as man himself. So as far back as man goes, God has been creating miracles in people's lives. If I just stop and look at it, and stop and acknowledge it, and stop worshiping these other things as my God, I get to realize what a miracle I am. What a miracle you must be. What a miracle you are. We finally saw that faith in some kind of God was a part of our makeup, just as much as the feeling we have for a friend. Now listen to what he says. Sometimes we had to search fearlessly. That's a fourth step. But he was there. So in the fourth step, we're going to start removing the things that block us from God, clear out the channel so the love light can shine, right? And now look what he says here. He was as much a fact as we were. Now that's a hell of a declaration that the book is making. He's saying the book, Alcoholics Anonymous, has stamped their approval on the fact that God is just as much a fact as we were. It's saying to me that it's a fact that Donna is sitting here right now. You can't dispute that. There she is. That's a fact. Alcoholics Anonymous is saying that if Donna is here, so is God. It's just as much a fact as we were. You can't dispute that. Does that make sense to you? It's actually a pretty cool concept when you think about it. Like, God is just as much a fact as we were. If you're here and I can't argue the fact that you're here, I can't argue the fact that God is here.
It is very beautiful if you think about it.
Yeah, pretty cool. And he's saying that he's as much a fact as we were. So anything less than the fact that you're here, Scott is here, that's a fact. You can't lessen that fact. You may not like Scott, but it doesn't lessen the fact that he's here. He was as much a fact as we were. He's here, God's here. We found the great reality, capitalized, talking about God, deep down within us. In the last analysis, it is only there that he may be found. It was so with us. So, now he's saying, you know, we talked a couple weeks ago, or whenever it was, we talked about E over I. Remember that? Emotion over intellect. And that's the way we're born. We're also born with what we call reflexes. We all have reflexes. If I sneak up behind you and go, ah, you flinch, right? If I put my hand like that in front of your face, you automatically blink your eyes. These things happen without a thought process. The blink of the eye is a reflection, a natural response of something, right? It's not a thought. You don't go like that and I go, oh, he might touch my face, let me blink my eyes and move back. That doesn't go on. It's just a natural reaction, right? It happens. Happens to everybody. When the shit is on us, or if we're in the battlefield, in the trenches, and the bombs are falling all around us, it's a natural thing to say, God help me. When we're stuck in the dope house or in jail or in the bar and life is shit and everything's coming down all over us, it's a natural reaction to say, God help me. There's an old saying, there are no atheists in the foxholes. Have you ever heard that one before? There are no atheists in the foxholes. When the bombs are dropping all around you, everybody's talking to God. I'll take a drop of that. Thank you. That's good, thanks. So when the bombs are dropping all around us, everybody's talking to God. There's no atheist there. What does all that mean? That God is such a natural part of us, though I've spent half of my life denying that, half of my life not willing to acknowledge that, half of my life trying to prove it wrong, yet still the fact remains that God is as much instinctively in me as a blink of the eye or anything else that happens like that. God is that natural in me. He says we can only clear the ground a bit if our testimony helps sweep away prejudice, that's the old thinking, enables you to think honestly, encourages you to search diligently within yourself. Then, if you wish, you can join us on the broad highway. With this attitude, you cannot fail. The consciousness of your belief is sure to come to you. Now, I want you to know something here. Did you hear what I just read to you? Did everybody hear what I just read to you? The big book of Alcoholics Anonymous is telling you if you do a certain thing, you cannot fail. You cannot fail.
It's a promise. They're promising that.
Yeah, it's absolutely a promise. It's a result. It's a result. That if you do these things, you cannot fail. In spite of your stupid self. If you learn to sweep away the prejudice, your old thinking, right? And think honestly, and search diligently within yourself, then you can join us on the broad highway, and with that attitude, you cannot fail. You will never drink and use again. You won't ever relapse. You won't ever do it. You will not fail. You cannot fail. Cannot fail. So why do people believe that at a certain point and then come back and say, oh, I went back out, I got loaded again? Well, they didn't get rid of their old thinking. They didn't change their old thinking, or they weren't thinking honestly. They didn't search diligently within themselves, and they didn't join us on the broad highway. They never got in the invisible boat. They kept walking around trying to find another way to get to the island. Looking for a bridge. Trying to swim. Fooling themselves. The consciousness of your belief is sure to come to you. That's what it's saying. It says, in this book you will read the experience of a man who thought he was an atheist. His story is so interesting that some of it should be told now. His change of heart was dramatic, convincing, and moving. And he talks about this guy being a minister's son, and he was depressed and all of this stuff, and then he was in the hospital, and he had the question. He said, if there's a God, he certainly hasn't done anything for me. And I had that same thought. I told you that. I shared that with you already when I got here. I knew there was a God, just didn't have anything to do with me. But later, alone in his room, he asked himself this question: is it possible that all religious people I have known are wrong? While pondering the answer, he felt as though he had lived in hell. Then, like a thunderbolt, a great thought came. It crowded out all else. Who are you to say there is no God? This man recounts how he tumbled out of bed to his knees. In a few seconds, he was overwhelmed by the conviction of the presence of God. It poured over and through him with the certainty and majesty of a great tide at flood. The barriers he had built through the years were swept away. He stood in the presence of infinite power and love. He stepped from bridge to shore. For the first time, he lived in conscious companionship with his Creator. Stepping from bridge to shore requires you to do more than saying, I believe. I keep repeating that because that paragraph back there, one of those pages, is you believe or willing to believe when you're emphatically sure you're on your ways. Many people think that is the second step. And that's just the beginning of the second step. Thus, our friend's cornerstone was fixed in place. And save for a few brief moments of temptation, the thought of a drink is never returned. And at such times, a great revulsion has risen up in him. Seemingly, he could not drink it if he would. God has restored his sanity. What is that but a miracle of healing? So, has God restored your sanity with the drinking, Scott?
Yes.
So what is that but a miracle of healing? It's a miracle. What you just attested to is that God has performed a miracle in your life. How long have you been sober?
Like 3 days short of 7 months.
7 months. Is that a miracle?
Yeah,
It's a miracle.
definitely.
He says, yet his elements are simple. Circumstances made him willing to believe. He humbly offered himself to his Maker. Then he knew. Even so has God restored us all to our right minds. To this man the revelation was sudden. Some of us grow into it more slowly. But he has come to all who have honestly sought him. When we drew near to him, he disclosed himself to us. That's the invisible boat. When you get in here and you start rowing, and you believe that you're going somewhere and you're doing the work, the boat will appear. So, all right, anybody got any questions or want to talk about anything on step 2? Okay, so here's your homework. And I want you to write this down, and I want you to complete this assignment for next week. I want you to make a list. And every time we talk about, I don't know if I ever went over this with you, but anytime we talk about lists in recovery here, we're not talking about long drawn out things. We're talking shopping list kind of stuff, right? You know, even when you do your 4th step, you know, it's not like when you go to the supermarket for coffee, milk, and eggs, you don't write coffee because when I wake up in the morning I need to have coffee, you know, milk because I need to have milk in my coffee. You don't, you just write coffee, milk, eggs, right? And so those are the kind of lists that we make here in recovery. So I want you to write down everything you think and believe about God. Now, I don't want you to write down, this is very important, I don't want you to write down stuff that you really don't believe, but you know you should, or you think you should. I just want you to write down what you think and believe about God. You say you have a God in your life. You say you have a higher power. Tell me what you think about this higher power. Tell me what you believe about this higher power. Short points. Boom, boom, boom. And don't do the generic stuff, all kind and all loving. I'll grant you that already, okay? God is all kind and all loving. Skip that and get to this new stuff you really believe. I want it to be personal, not generic. It needs to be personal. What is it you think and believe about God? Because when we get this list next week, we're going to look at it and we're going to press, change, and rearrange it. We're going to remove the stuff that is negative, and then we're going to add stuff that maybe we'd like our God to be. When I did my list, I didn't have sense of humor down there. And when I talked with my sponsor about it, he said, well, what would you like your God to be? I said, I'd like my God to have a sense of humor. He said, you don't think God has a sense of humor? I said, no, I don't know. He said, look at you, tell me he ain't got a sense of humor. He says, well, he said, but if you'd like your God to have a sense of humor, but you don't think he does, put it on the list.
So is it two lists, what we think and believe that he is, and then?
What do we think and believe about God?
Oh, okay,
About God. What is it we think about God? What is it we believe about God? You know, what is it? You know, I have this God that I understand. What is it I understand about God? And it's really important to try to make it personal. Again, stay away from the generic stuff. Well, kind, and loving, and caring, and this and that. You know, what is it you think about God? So that's important. We're going to go over that next week. Hey, Ange, how you doing? All right. So we got some time. Anybody want to talk about step 2 at all? By the way, whenever if you're ever studying, you know, we use the big book to do the steps. We don't use the 12 and 12 to do the steps, and some people do. And step 2. There might be some good stuff in step 2 in the 12 and 12, but step 2 was they asked a bunch of people when they were writing it to put their opinion about what other people should, the people they sponsor and stuff. So step 2 is probably, to me, the worst step in the 12 and 12 to try to study, because it's just opinions of other guys that were sober at the time they were writing that. And we kind of take it as, you know, what it should be. So, does anybody want to, got any questions, or we got 5 minutes left?
So, okay,
Go ahead.
what were you saying about the beginning of step 2? The shore of,
Yeah.
the shore of faith. Getting
What?
to the shore of faith is the beginning of step 2, and what the completion is actually stepping onto it.
You were saying, yeah,
You referred back to page 53, and you were saying that people read that and they think that that's step 2, and it's only, but it's
What's the
only the
beginning?
beginning of step 2.
No. I was referring to, when I just said that, I was referring to page 47. Second paragraph. We needed to ask ourselves but one short question: do I now believe, or am I even willing to believe, that there is a power greater than myself? As soon as a man can say that he does believe or is willing to believe, we emphatically assure him that he is on his way. It has been repeatedly proven among us that upon this simple cornerstone, a wonderfully effective spiritual structure can be built. That's what I'm talking about, that people say that that's step 2, that's all there is. And I think there's 36 paragraphs after that, and many pages. So, I think I shared that if that was step 2, then all the rest of the stuff don't need to be in the chapter. That if you look at right above that, the sentence, 2 sentences before that, it says, that was growth, but if we wish to grow, we had to begin somewhere. So we used our own conception, however limited it was. So what that is the beginning of step 2. Is that, do I now believe or am I even willing to believe? That's the beginning of the second step. But I need to, I need to talk about this God. Because, again, the next step is going to ask me to turn my will and my life over to the care of this thing that we're talking about here, right? This higher power. How, I've said this to you many times, it's impossible to do the third step if you don't do a good second step. How can I possibly turn my will and my life over to the care of something that I have no understanding of? Something that I'm not comfortable with? Something that I don't get at all, right? So it's very important that we talk about God, and it's also important to spend time and help people to believe in the solution and let people know that they are worthy and that God loves them and that people love them and that they are valued. And those are the things we've talked about over the last few weeks. And so we're 11 weeks into it and we're just getting to the end of the second step. And we're not finished yet because next week we got to do some more stuff on step 2. Okay, so next week we are meeting at, where are we meeting at? 3084 North Portland. For anybody that's watching this week, next week we will be at 3084 North Portland, right next to the old round table group that used to be there. We're going to meet there, and then hopefully the week after we'll be back here. Okay? All right, guys, thank you. Same time, same channel next week. Thank you.